Hi, Rod Fleming in the Philippines here, and today we're not discussing the usual things. We're going to discuss Tommy Robinson and the furore surrounding his arrest last Friday in England. Now, the first thing to understand is that there's nothing Orwellian or bizarre about what happened to Tommy. What happened was the inevitable result of his actions. So let's have a quick look at how things work in both the UK jurisdictions, Scotland and England. English rules are actually slightly less severe than Scottish ones in this regard, but essentially a number of rules are put in place which are intended to protect the rights of the defendant, not the accusers or the state, the defendant. And these are called sub judice rules. As soon as someone is charged with an offence, and before they come to trial, no reporting or discussion of the case itself, the events surrounding it, is permitted. The press is simply, in Scotland, it's very simply to state the gender or sex of the accused and the town they come from. In England they are able to reveal slightly more details. But that's it, you can't talk about it anymore. Once you go to court, as evidence is read out in court, that becomes public domain and it can then normally be reported by the media. However, in cases of extreme sensitivity, judges have the right to impose further reporting restrictions, right? And normally these will amount to a blanket ban on any reporting of evidence led in court until the end of the trial itself, and that includes until sentencing is completed. Okay? Now, Judge Geoffrey Marston QC in this case put in place such reporting restrictions right at the beginning of the case because of the high sensitivity of the case itself. The case involves men accused of being part of a grooming gang responsible for raping hundreds of women across the north of England. Now, there are many such gangs. They all come from a Pakistani Muslim background. They have been active for 25 years, and it is an absolute scandal that they have been allowed to go on as long as they have without anyone doing anything about it. And it's only this year, over the last year, that successful prosecutions have been brought. Now, Tommy Robinson believes very firmly, as I do, that this should never have happened. The judge in this case put in place the reporting restrictions, which meant that nothing could be said about what was going on in court, for two reasons. The first was to protect the identity of the victims. The second was to protect the identity of the accused in order to prevent a situation occurring whereby the accused could claim that prejudiced reporting had meant they could not have a fair trial. His interest was in avoiding a technical claim leading to an appeal which could have got the men off if they were proven guilty. Okay, so Marston is not the baddie here. He was just wanting to see a fair trial. And let's compare this with what's happened to numerous white men over the last year, where they have been accused falsely by women of rape. The cases have either collapsed for lack of evidence or they've been thrown out in court. These did not have reporting restrictions in place, and as a result, these men's lives have been ruined. Some have lost their university careers, some have lost their jobs, they have been ostracised by family and all that, all because of false accusation of rape, and that could all have been avoided if the judges in those cases had simply said, well, the men's name will not be revealed until the end of the case. And the guilty verdict found da-da-dee-da. What Tommy Robinson did was to fly in the face of the intent of the judge. Sub judice rules mean that the reporting of what goes on in court is sub judice, under the justice. That's what it means. The court gets to decide, the judge gets to decide how much you can and how much you can't tell the world about what's going on in his courtroom, right? And how much you can discuss it. Okay? There's no professional journalist in the UK that would have done what Tommy did. Just not one. We're all trained. We all go through our law for journalist classes, we all understand that this is the quickest way you can think of getting yourself in jail is to commit a contempt of court. And when you basically flit off a judge and say, well, I don't care what you said, I'm going to report on it anyway, that's contempt. And it's as simple as that. I hear a lot of nonsense from USicans here talking about how this terrible system and it's Orwellian and how it's against freedom of speech. It's not against freedom of speech. It's about protecting individuals and ensuring fair trials, the verdicts of which will be cast iron and not be open to challenge on technical reasons later on. Now, in the United States, you have the First Amendment, which would make all that impossible. Everything is out in the open. But because of that, you have a whole raft of different protections in place, like, for example, jury vetting. Advocates can challenge the jury individually, and if they don't like a juror, that juror's not on. Jury empanelment, so that the jury is routinely locked up in important cases. You don't get to see their family. A case could go on for months. They're locked up. The point is they don't want the jurors to be influenced by by discussing the case outside of the court itself. The jury in a criminal case, in all cases, is expected to simply listen to the evidence and come to a decision. Okay? It's not expected to speculate or have discussions with third parties about it. Its role is very simple. Then again, in the United States, although these rules have changed somewhat in the last 50 years, it's much easier to have an appeal in the United States than there is in Britain. In Britain, normally an appeal can only occur if there is actually a technical breach, that is, the judge made an error, right? Or valid new evidence has come to light. And that will actually normally trigger, rather than an appeal, that would be a retrial, a full retrial. So what Tommy did was against all the rules. To recap on the actual events of the night, on Friday last, Tommy Robinson appeared outside the court where the trial was going on of these men accused of being a grooming gang. And he made a 1 hour long Facebook Live commentary on the steps of the court, and he also photographed the men entering the court building. This is absolutely a contempt. Jeffrey Marston, on being informed of what was going on, presumably, we don't know exactly how this worked out, asked the police to detain Tommy. He was arrested on a breach of the peace charge. Arrested on breach. Breach of the peace is a catch-all. A lot of people who get arrested for breach don't get charged, or they might get charged with a different offence, a more severe one. Breach itself is a low-level offence, which, you know, it's going to get you like a 50 quid fine for your first offence maximum. Probably an admonishment from the beak, you know. Don't do that again, son, or we'll have you. It just allows the police to arrest you, right there and then. That's why we're arresting you on the grounds of breach of the peace. Tommy was then formally charged with contempt of court because he had broken the judge's reporting restriction. Now, it's important to realise at this point that Tommy is not a first offender. Tommy has a series of offences to his name on a whole bunch of different topics, cases. Now, some of these, I quite agree with you, look very suspicious and trumped up. Others are fair enough, you know. He's been done for assault, he's been done for a whole bunch of stuff. Entering the USA on a false passport. This is a man with a criminal record. He also has a record of contempt of court. And indeed, he was under a suspended sentence, right, of 3 months for a previous contempt of court. Right? When Marston brought him into the courtroom and said, "You're accused of a contempt of court for breaking my specific instruction," there was to be no reporting on this case until the trial was finished and the verdict and the sentencing delivered, Tommy Robinson there and then pled guilty. Now, some people have suggested that he was coerced into pleading guilty. That's a nonsense. He was guilty. He was obviously guilty. He did exactly what the judge had interdicted, and there's no point in pleading not guilty in a case like that. All that will happen is that you'll get lots of extra time added to your tariff. if you challenge the judge again in that way. He would have been advised, he didn't have his own lawyer there, he would have been advised by the court's appointed lawyer that, you know, the quickest way to see his kids again would be to plead guilty, because he was guilty. Now, at that point, the 3-month suspended sentence, which was already in place, automatically falls due. The man is going to jail for those 3 months, no matter what Marston did. But it's not his first offence for contempt. Marston is quite right in thinking that, generally speaking, if you do the same offence twice, then the tariff goes up. He put on a heavier tariff on Robinson for the second offence, the offence committed last Friday. So he added another, so he gave him on that count 10 months, and these are to be served consecutively. So he now has, Tommy Robinson now has a 13-month period in jail. How much he'll actually serve depends on his behaviour, and I doubt if he'll see more than 6 months, to be honest with you, but that's beside the point. Now, I saw a report from InfoWars this morning, and God, you guys really need to work on your journalism. And they were criticising Marston for not watching the whole of the YouTube feed. This is a complete misunderstanding of the situation. Marston doesn't need to read the YouTube feed, or sorry, to watch the YouTube feed. All he needed to know, to establish beyond doubt, was whether or not Tommy Robinson actually had been commenting on the ongoing case. Because that was what the injunction, the reporting restrictions covered. No comment on this case. If you comment on this case, you're in contempt. It doesn't matter what Tommy actually said. The fact that he was commenting at all, that's it. You know, you're done, Gov. It's a fair cop. I can't see anything, and I don't think any journalist would see anything wrong with this. Now, because the case occurred on a Friday afternoon, and it was late on Friday by the time that sentence was passed on Tommy Robinson, and the judge had put in place a further reporting restriction which prevented discussion of the arrest and imprisonment of Tommy Robinson himself, nothing could happen to clear that until Monday, because British courts don't work on weekends, right? So on Monday, the broader media, but represented by the local newspaper, and this is the normal way that this is done, petitioned the court for the reporting restrictions to be lifted, and on Tuesday they were, and that was that. The reporting restrictions were lifted. We were free to discuss not the original trial, that still remains under reporting restrictions, but we're free to discuss the case of Tommy Robinson's arrest and conviction for breach of the reporting restrictions. That's all we're allowed to discuss. I personally think that the mainstream media have been cowardly in their reporting of this case since Tuesday, but, you know, everybody has an editorial position. I think that they could have come out strongly. I think at the same time that the people who are actually in the so-called MSM, the mainstream media, are journalists, they're trained journalists. They would look at what Tommy Robinson did and said, what an idiot, what a stupid thing to do. You obviously were going to go to court, and there is no doubt about that. Now, Katie Hopkins, someone I admire greatly, did make the point that there was Tommy in front of the court without a lawyer there, and I have to ask myself, would a lawyer have actually accompanied him? Well, in the first case, there is a possibility that the lawyer could be seen as an accessory to a contempt, and that could lead to great problems for himself, including possible issues with his own legal body. Could lead to his the removal of his professional status. He knew that man, if Tommy Robinson had asked him to accompany him to this event that he was going to stage on the steps of the court, then that means the lawyer would have known that they were going to commit a criminal offence. There's no way around that one. And just by being there, he would have been an accessory to it. So it either, possibly Tommy Robinson didn't think to ask, but it's also possible that Tommy Robinson went, I can't implicate my lawyer. It's possible that he did, and the lawyer said, no, I can't do that. you're going to be arrested, you're going to be charged, you're going to go to jail. I don't know what was going on in Tommy's head. You know, he's a man of great passion and fire, but he's done some unbelievably stupid things in his life. Recklessly flaunting the law. And that rings alarm bells. You do wonder about the underlying nature of the man, and it suggests that he's maybe not as stable as perhaps he should be, and that he needs to calm down. Now, the issue that he has exercised about here, the grooming gangs, well, it is a scandal. It's a major public scandal in the United Kingdom. And Tommy has done a great deal to try to educate people about the nature of the scandal and try to make it public and try to stop it. And it has been going on for decades. It has certainly been going on since the 90s. So what we have in the UK is an establishment collusion, which comes from the British establishment's essential anti-Semitism, which leads to their pro-Islam stance. And this is bad. This is really bad. They're prepared to let Muslims get away with things that they should never get away with, and which they never would get away with under any other circumstances. I don't think those considerations were part of Marston's decision. I think he just wanted to see a trial that could not be challenged. And Tommy Robinson's activity, as he said in, the judge himself said in a later statement in court, could have prejudiced the outcome of the trial. It could have given the defence the opportunity to raise an appeal on the grounds of no fair trial, right? Because Robinson had been circulating information about the trial before the end of the trial, which is exactly what Marston had tried to avoid by putting in place his reporting restrictions in the first place. I think that it's high time that US Americans remembered that they are under 5% of the world's population, and that your laws do not apply anywhere else. Do not be judging British law by US standards. I don't know any British person who would rather be tried in the United States than in Britain. The British judicial system does actually work. And yes, there are situations in which that impedes people's right to free speech. But there are very specific circumstances, and there are very specific reasons for these restrictions on free speech to be put in place. This is not part of the broader erosion of rights to free speech that is happening in the United Kingdom right now. It is happening due to the political left and their desire for what they call to ban what they call hate speech. Tommy Robinson was doing his best. I think it's very sad that for 13 months or whatever it is, he will not be able to fight the fight for freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and liberty in the UK. But on his own head be it, what he did was a clear breach of the law. It was contempt. There's no way around it.